Thanks for checking out this fellowship message video. We pray that it encourages you and draws you closer to Jesus. And don't forget to follow us online at Formacom. It's the best way to stay up to date with things going on at our church.
My name is Robert, and I have the joy of being the lead pastor here at Fellowship. And I'm excited for this series that we're in right now. It's called Forgiven. We really looked at the famous line, "For unto us a son is given." And why did Jesus come? Why did he come that Christmas? Why did he come as a baby? Well, it's so that we may be forgiven. Now let me ask you this: in your family parties, your work parties, your house parties, whatever you may have, your neighborhoods, friends, when you gather, I want you to think about it. There is always that guy. Do you know who I'm talking about? The guy no one wants to be there. Maybe they're the one that hurt you, or they're the one that said something, or they're the one that did something, and everyone kind of shudders when that uncle or that friend or that coworker shows up. And oftentimes, when that happens, it changes the dynamics of the room. It changes the dynamics of the gathering. And there seems to be this resentment, especially this time of year, where maybe the brokenness and struggles of our family come to light. Maybe the hardship or the pain in our workplace becomes all too real. Or maybe we just look and we say, everyone feels so inauthentic, so not themselves. This is actually not that joyful of a time because there's something broken between us. And maybe that's not the case for you, but I would argue that most times in our lives we have moments where we are dealing with people that are really, really hard to love. And the question becomes, what do we do when faced with those? What do we do when we have that party or that event that we have to go to, or that family gathering, and we're just cringing on the inside to go there? Well, this whole series is looking at the answer to healing those wounds, to bringing about healthy relationships, to restoring it, and it all begins with forgiveness. In fact, the very reason Jesus came as a baby into this world was so that we may be forgiven. But I'm going to be the first to say that forgiveness is not easy. In fact, it's very hard. And think about it. Have you ever been hurt by someone? I remember being in high school, and I was an awkward kid. I mean, I still find myself to be awkward, but then I was really awkward. And there were several reasons why I was really awkward. One, I was in a lot of AP classes, and one of those kids that was in student council and on all the smart classes. But on the other hand, I was a 3-sport athlete. And so I was awkward because I was too much of an athlete to fit in with the smart kids, and I was too much of a smart kid to fit in with the athletes. So I just kind of was. And then add to the equation, I had really red hair. It's kind of gotten darker over the time. And in high school, especially those years, a popular show was on TV, and I won't say it, but it was started with South and ended with Park. And they made fun of redheads all the time. And so I got made fun of for having red hair. I didn't really have that place I belonged. I just had friends, but they weren't necessarily close friends. And I was just awkward. So it all came to a head one time when, after a football practice, I'll never forget, I walk into the locker room, and I don't know what happened. I couldn't even tell you what happened. But there was this one kid that just wanted to just pick on me. And so they locked the locker room door, and he tried with everything in him to shove me into a locker. Yeah, I'm telling you, it was awkward for me. It was a low point in my life as he tried to stuff me into this locker, and I didn't know what to do. Now, this was a time that I was pretty hurt. In fact, not physically, because I wouldn't fit in the locker, but I was hurt even emotionally. And so in that moment, what was I to do? I think, like many of you, I was raised by a father who was a very strong, big man, and he always said to me, don't let someone push you around or pick on you. And I think oftentimes we say that. And that's not necessarily untrue, but let me ask this question. If someone punches you, do you punch them back? If someone punches you, do you punch them back? Well, I Googled this because that's where we get all our answers to life, right? And this is what Google told me. If a person punches you and you punch back to defend yourself against the person attacking you, it is self-defense. Cool. But this is what it goes on to say. If you punch somebody 3 hours later, after they punched you, that constitutes as assault. At that point, you're no longer defending yourself, as there was no perceived threat or harm at that point. So legally, if you punch back right away, you're okay. But if you wait 3 hours, you're not. But let me tell you, Google's not my authority. Jesus is. Let me share the words of Jesus. You have heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Maybe you have heard that. If someone hurts you, hurt them back. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. You know, the word slap there in the original language is actually whipped. If someone whips you, give them the other cheek. Let them whip that one too. I think Jesus' answer is very different from Google's answer. While we might think our initial reaction should be to fight with all our strength and to punch that person back, Jesus would say that doesn't get you anywhere. Turn the other cheek, it's going to get you a whole lot further. You see, when we're in these situations, when someone hurts us, when we're facing that painful scenario, it is in our natural instinct to do one of two things. We either fight or flight. Maybe you've heard of this. You either fight back, it's your natural instinct to either fight back or to run away. I remember that high school locker room, my instinct, I knew I was an awkward, not that big of a kid type of person, so I tried to run with all of my might. Flight. The best way to explain that situation in fight is flight is, put it this way, your initial reaction is like hitting a gas pedal. When you hit that gas pedal in a car, all the excitement, the adrenaline of just it going fast and it speeding up. When you're faced with a hurtful situation, you have all of this building up inside of you, this adrenaline rush, and you are going to respond in some way. Maybe someone hurt you. Maybe it was a boss or a coworker or a friend or a neighbor or a family member. And how often do you want to send that email to them? Do you want to make that phone call? Do you want to just go at them and cut them down at the throat? Do you just want to let them know how you feel? That's natural. That's your gas pedal. It's your adrenaline. But then later on, you apply the brake. And you realize how far you've gone and the damage you've done. And you look back and you say, why did I act that way? And sometimes you're glad you acted the way you did. And sometimes, I think more times than not, you have regret for the way that you acted the way you did. So have you ever been hurt by someone? And if you have, what's been your response? Hurt isn't always being shoved into a locker. It's not always a punch, a physical punch. Hurt very often, more often, is probably an emotional hurt. It's something that has been said to you, or you heard, or gossiped about you, something that happened maybe even behind your back, and that hurt inside of you builds up so much that you begin to resent that person. You begin to get frustrated with that person. So what do you do about it? How do you respond? And each of us, if we could be real, have had a hurtful moment, at least one, I'm sure many, in our lives. And from each one we learn and we grow. And so this morning and in the weeks to come, I want us to really encourage to dive into those hurtful situations and prepare for how will we respond. And there's this great story in the Bible of a man named David. Now, David was not perfect. He didn't get everything right. But David is the one who we refer to Jesus' lineage coming from King David. That's why Mary and Joseph even went to Bethlehem, because of where David was from. And so it's in 1 Samuel 24. It's page 212. If you want to pull out the Bibles around you, we're going to be looking at this chapter, 1 Samuel chapter 24. And we're going to be looking at a situation, a story between a man named David and a man named Saul. Now, I want you to understand that Saul was the king of Israel at the time. He was the ruler. David, if you're familiar with the story, is the same David that slayed a giant called Goliath. David was the little shepherd boy who took a few stones and took down a giant. This David then, after that moment, went on as the people would chant and say that Saul killed thousands, David tens of thousands. Now you have to understand, in this era, in this time, a man's success in leadership was how many people they took down. And so David was getting all of this credit for being this man who killed tens of thousands of people. And what happens when you're the king, you're the leader, and someone under you, someone that just plays a harp for you or serves you, begins to become more successful than you? What tends to happen? Jealousy. Saul builds up this jealousy of David. Well, why aren't they singing about me? I'm the king. And so, do you know what Saul's response was? To seek after David and to kill him. And so here's poor little David, been doing nothing but trying to be a hero for the people, trying to do what God was calling him to do, and now he ends up having to run for his life. I want you to picture this. You're running for your life. Someone is hunting you down. I think this is pretty bad. It's much worse than being shoved into a locker. This is someone looking for you. They want to kill you. And you are in the wilderness. And you're running, just you and your men. So let's read the first few verses of that. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness." Here's his location, in En-Gedi. And Saul took 3,000 chosen men. Catch this, 3,000 chosen, not just some men. I don't think he chose the weak ones. I think he chose 3,000 of the strongest men he could, and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goat tracks. He had a plan. This is where I'm going to get him. This is how I'm going to get David. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave. Now this next part is where I just find God's humor absolutely hilarious, okay? Because as we read the Bible, it's not a boring book, and this is why. Are you ready? And Saul went there to take a poop. It says he went to relieve himself. All right, so here's Saul, like all human beings, even if he's king, has to relieve himself. You know what's often humbling, if you ever want to think about those who have really, maybe you're jealous of or envious of, or you're like, man, look at all they have. Let me just remind you that we all have to use a toilet, every single human being, and we all have to put our pants on one leg at a time. So I don't care what your title or your position, you all have to do it. And I love that the Bible points that out. So now Saul has to take a pause. But then catch this. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. Did you catch the scenario? Here's Saul. He has his plan. But his body has a different plan. And so he has to stop. He has to stop in this cave, and he has no clue that David is there. And David and his men are hiding in this cave, and Saul is there sitting taking a crap. You with me? This is really, really interesting. So then what does David do? The guy who's chasing you down, the guy who wants to get at you, the guy who wants to kill you, is sitting there. No clue that you and your men are there. What do you do? I would say that Saul offered a pretty hard punch to David. So what is David's response? Well, let's see what his men say first in verse 4. And the men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seemed good to you." Catch this. His men are saying, David, here is your golden opportunity. This is your chance to cut him down. You see, oftentimes when we're hurt, it can justify payback. This can be our moment. This can be our chance. They hurt me. Here's my opportunity. And David's men are egging him on. Look, this is your opportunity. So then David arose and stealthily, I love that, like he was like covert, cut off a corner of his robe. Now I can only imagine what his men said. Here's David, who had killed tens of thousands of people. His enemy is right there, and all he does is cut off a corner of his robe. He could have done anything. He could have killed him. He could have struck him down right there. But he cut off a corner of his robe. I just imagine his men being like, seriously, David, that's all you did to him? Come on, you could have done so much more. But David was a man after God's own heart. And I truly think that that was the reason he didn't take down Saul, but that he just cut off a part. But this is what I find so interesting, that God changes our perspective. When we walk with God, when we're in step with God, when we're living for God, our perspective changes, and it changes drastically. In my little worldview, I think David could have done so much more to Saul than he did. But he cut off a little part of his robe. But David, as you're going to see, didn't even feel good about that. Verse 5, and afterwards, David's heart struck him. Have you ever done something and you just felt in your gut, like, oh, that was not right. I did the wrong thing. I said the wrong thing. I acted in the wrong way. If we're to actually look at this in the original language to understand the context of it, it's not that his heart was just struck. It was like it was literally punched. Have you ever had that moment where it's like something happened and you felt that punch to the heart? That's what David felt. Not after killing Saul, after cutting off a little piece of his robe. Because it says, because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. That's why he felt this way. And he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing that he is the Lord's anointed." So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. The gas pedal instinct was to attack. But David had the maturity. He was in such unity with God that he knew that wasn't the right method. He withheld. And I would argue that when David hit the brake pedal, he didn't have regret. But then the Bible tells us that he did, because he even probably went a little too far. See, when we see through God's eyes, we see differently. Instead of attacking, the Spirit will remind us to stop. And I would argue this, when we're faced with that hurt and that hardship and that person that's just under our skin, instead of striking a blow, give them a bow. Instead of striking a blow, give them a bow. When someone hurts you, when someone punches you, don't punch them back. Bow. Bow to them. Look at what David does in verses 5 or in verse 8 to 11. Afterward, David arose and went out of the cave and called, Saul, my lord, the king. Can you imagine that? Now he's calling out his name, drawing attention. And when Saul looked behind him, David did what? Can you say it with me? Bowed. David did what? Bowed. He bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. He paid respect. And David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Behold, David seeks to harm you? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hands in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. I want you to think about this for a moment. David bowed before Saul, a man who was chasing him down, a man who wanted to kill him. And this is what David does. Hey, Saul, I'm right here. That's enough of a scary thing, right? He draws attention to it. And then he bows before him. Now, I want you to understand him bowing. This is literally him completely humbling himself to the point of saying, Saul, do whatever with me as you please. If I'm bowed, can I fight? No. Saul could have easily just chopped off David's head. Could have ended it right there. Have we ever thought of that? That he was so humble to the fact that say, Saul, I respect you. You're my king. You're my Lord. I'm going to bow to this point. One lesson that we can really learn from David, and especially as it comes to forgiveness, is that our job is not to change people. How often in our life do we think we're going to say something or do something or pay them back in such a way that now they're going to change because of it? And how many times have we done that and they haven't changed at all? I've learned in my short life that most people, in fact all people, care more about themselves than anyone else. And any time I've tried to strike a blow or get someone back, it only puffs them up all the more because they only care about themselves. They don't care about teeny, little, tiny me. They care about their name, their status, their success. They don't care about mine. And so if I think I'm going to change them, I'm fooling myself. And this is where being a follower of God is so relieving. Because it's not our duty to change people, and it's not our duty to even pay them back. Do you know why? Because God says that everyone is going to give an account one day. And that he's a just God. And he is going to figure it all out for us. In fact, in the New Testament, this is after Jesus even ascends into heaven, there's a man named Paul, and Paul is one of the greatest writers in the New Testament, and he writes this to the church in Thessalonica. He's in Thessalonica. He says, look, God is just. He will pay back trouble for those who trouble you. Do you know how relieving it is to say, I don't have to handle it because there's a God way bigger, way stronger, way mightier than me. He's got my back. God is going to pay back. He is the ultimate judge. He is the ultimate authority. Oftentimes, we try to discern what is good and what is bad. Let's just leave that up to God, because in our finite world, we aren't able to do that. But a good, loving, just God can. So our job's not to change people. Our job is to love people. There's a big difference. 1 Samuel 24:16-19 says this. As soon as David had finished speaking, these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" Now, of all the responses Saul could have done, I want you to see what happens. And Saul lifted up his voice and, what does it say? Wept. The humility of David, bowing before Saul, causes the king, Saul, to do what? To weep. Have you ever made your enemy weep? Chances are, probably not, unless you've loved them really well. Because when we love people, when they're not expecting to be loved, they can't help but be changed because of it. Let me paint this picture for you. Fighting lasts until there is a winner and a loser. If you're going to get into a fight, there's going to be one winner and one loser. And the fighting is going to go back and forth and last until there is one winner and one loser. Love has the ability for both to win. You see, when we love well, we can actually help both parties win. And I would argue in doing that, we become more and more after God's own heart. Because God changes hearts. And why does God change hearts when people can't? Well, because God is different than every other person. God is supreme to us. He's bigger than us. He's the God who created everything. So why can't he change hearts? He changed the heart of Saul. He changes the hearts of kings and leaders and lords. So if God is truly different, then followers of God should live differently. If we're truly following after God, we're going to live differently. But this is what I see too often in Christian communities. I call it the silent treatment. Have you ever given someone the silent treatment? I'm guilty of it. Someone says something to me or ticks me off or gets under my skin. And so what do? Well, if I ignore them long enough, they'll know that I'm mad. And when they know that I'm mad, then they're going to change and they're going to see from my perspective. Has that worked very well for you? Because for me, it hasn't. In fact, it just keeps building up this rage inside of me more and more. And I see it happen time and time again, where instead of talking to someone or trying to work through or even forgiving things, we simply give them the silent treatment. And we call ourselves Christians. But here's the thing that we see from Jesus. Forgiveness is not deserved, but it's given anyways. Oftentimes, the people that hurt us don't deserve to be forgiven. They hurt us. It's painful. But when we have the humility to forgive them anyways, we're walking more in step with God. When I was in high school, this event caused me to quit the football team. It caused me to change everything, to just kind of run. And I can tell you that for a long time, that memory, that moment, it bottled up inside of me, and it only made me more upset. When I saw those teammates in the hallway, it only built rage up inside of me more and more. But it was when I actually let it go, when I realized that they had a hurt too, that they were going through things that I couldn't understand, and when I just forgave them and let it go, I could see them in the hallway again. I was free. I didn't have to hold on to it anymore. I didn't have to have that pain carry with me anymore. Let me paint a picture for us as followers of Jesus. How many times have we hurt God? How many times have we turned our back to God? How many times have we said, you know what, God, I've had enough of you? Those high school years, for me, were a time of running from God. I was striving with every part of me to be popular, but I was just awkward. And in that time, and even in the years after, I did things and said things and believed things that were hurtful, I believe, to God. In fact, there were times in my life where I even said, God, I'm done with you. How many times have we turned our backs on God? Maybe done things that we shouldn't do. Lived a life that we knew we shouldn't be living. But then what did God do for us? He came into the world as a little baby. He lived a perfect life that no human being could ever live. And he was the only human being to truly die an innocent death. And why did he do it? Because he forgave each and every one of us for what we would do to hurt him. And why can't we forgive people? So, church, let me challenge us with this. When someone hurts you, when someone strikes you emotionally, physically, however it is, and I know that wounds are deep, trust me, I know. I've talked to people who maybe their brother or a sibling was killed innocently, and they have this rage inside of them, this pain inside of them, and I can only imagine the hurt. Trust me, I get it. We have these pains and these hurts. But no matter how severe it is, let me challenge you that when faced with those situations, and when someone hurts you, instead of offering them a blow, offer them a bow, and watch what the love of God will do to change their life. Will you pray with me? Father, I pray that as a church, we would follow after your heart. That God, we would put right before you right now the hurts and the pains and the struggles that we face. And right now in the stillness and the silence, I pray that you would bring to mind a hurt, a pain, even bring to mind a person that we are angry with, we're bitter against, we want to pay them back. God, would you just put that person right there on our mind and on our heart right now? What are we to do, God? I pray that you would give us the strength, that you would give us the confidence in you to offer them a bow, to love them, to humble ourselves before them, to let you handle the payback, and give us the strength to love them well. And I pray for each and every face that we see, each and every name that we have on our hearts and in our mind, that, Lord, when we love them well, when we truly humble ourselves before you and let you do the work, that each and every face and name would weep. They would weep like Saul wept because they know that, God, you're a God that is love, and that through us simply bowing, that we would show your love to them. In your name we pray. Amen.